All right. So this is strategies for introducing socially challenged dogs to other dogs. Just a little about this workshop, what it is, what it's not. It's about techniques, strategies for introducing dogs that historically struggle with other dogs, around other dogs, or we don't have the information and we think they're gonna have problems, that kind of thing. It's like, how do we conduct introductions that are gonna set this dog up to succeed, really. It's about improving social skills and helping the dogs reach what I call their social ceiling. Every dog's got a capability, and we try to max them out in their social capabilities, and those capabilities aren't going to be equal across the board. So it is for kind of a moderate to advanced level, so we're going to really gloss over some basics of playgroup. I could do a whole 3 days on just basics of playgroups, but this is going to be a little bit more moderate to advanced, I'd say. What this is not is, I want to take my dog to the dog park. I need this dog to be good in daycare. Those might be outcomes that result from this work, but that's not the purpose of it. Some dogs are just not going to be dog daycare dogs or dog park dogs. And really what we're trying to do is just improve dogs. And again, I'm coming from a shelter background, heavily shelter background, where we're trying to make dogs more adoptable, more appealing to the public, making them safer for the public, things like that. So we're trying to just max them out, really, or at least take steps towards that. Please ask questions. I'm going off these slides, but I've got ADD pretty bad, and I'll go off into these tangents, and I'll probably forget what I was talking about and not be clear about certain things. Just, hey, what was your point again? Just feel free to raise your hand and ask questions if I'm not being clear about something. This is really heavily based on my experience, beliefs and philosophies about this stuff. I feel like I've been pretty successful in what I've done, but a lot of it's intuitive at this point. I've been just doing it a long time, and I'm really trying to make it something that's like teachable. I'm not promising I'm right about everything. I'm sure there's different methods and people are going to disagree about certain things. That's okay. This is just based on what I've found. I'm going to make mistakes in the next 3 days. That's guaranteed. This is a type of work where you're just making decision after decision after decision. You're hoping that your mistakes, you've accounted for possible mistakes and kind of put in place ways to minimize any risk involved with your mistakes. A lot of times you'll make mistakes and nothing bad happens. There's no bad result, but if I notice I've made a mistake, I'll point out I should have done this differently, or you might point it out that maybe, and I'm totally cool if you guys see me do something that totally contradicts what I said before. Point it out. I might have a reason. I might have just screwed up. So yeah, I don't mind screwing up. So yeah, and some things are just not going to go as planned. We're at the mercy of the weather. We're at the mercy of the dogs. I have an image of how it would go if it went perfectly. It's not going to go like that. Just roll with the punches. Is that the term? And yeah, try to have fun. So why this workshop? I just personally, all the work I've done, I'm with Ashley on this. I just feel like there's no better feeling than when you can get these dogs out with other dogs and see them actually act like normal dogs and get past some of those barriers that and sort of calm, we call it even out, and just sort of even out with these groups. I just think there's nothing better. I think for long-term safety, if you've got a dog that is never around other dogs, an accidental run-in is bound to happen at some point. Okay. The more prepared they are, it doesn't mean that they're gonna not still get into a fight or be defensive if a dog runs up to them off leash, but you got a better chance if they're around other dogs that they're gonna respond in an appropriate way in that context. It's also less stressful for the parents and the handlers if they know that their dogs are around other dogs now and then. They're not constantly, oh my God, it's another dog. It helps them not make it worse when those accidental run-ins might happen. In a shelter environment, the increased adoptability and the easier stimulation, it's insane how much it helps them. It can reduce reactivity. When I have to work with a leash reactive dog, if I don't have a way to, if I don't have a way to also try to fill that socialization need, I hate working on it because I feel like I have part of this reactivity is due to the fact they're not interacting. And so I almost feel like it's counterintuitive in a way just to work on reactivity without working on socialization. Especially for the fearful type dogs, if you've got those environmentally scared dogs, they can find a lot of comfort in other dogs that are confident in those environments. So I really like to use it as a way to increase socialization. So when I was working here, we would often take fearful dogs to the park here, to the trails with other dogs that have fun with them. Like you'd see them having fun and then use that momentum to go. There used to be a pet store across the street and we'd go straight to the pet store and try to use that momentum to socialize them with the pet store, that kind of thing. So it can be really helpful for that if you can get those fearful dogs comfortable with other dogs. I'm gonna be talking about this a bunch. From the moment we get a dog out, it's basically a continuous process that you're going through over and over and over again, really rapidly until those dogs go back inside. I basically kind of broke it down into these sections of what you're actually doing in those moments. So the most important part probably is the noticing, right? So as soon as we bring a dog out, we want to really notice any changes in the dog's behavior, in the human behavior that's around, in your own behavior, what you're doing, any changes in the environment, dogs barking, that kind of thing. It all may matter to what happens next. It might not, it might. The important thing is that you're paying attention to these things and noticing. Interpreting what they might mean and predicting how the dog might respond. You might say, okay, you bring out this dog and then somebody's walking a dog past the yard or something. In your head, you want to try to interpret, okay, what does that mean? The dog might run over and bark, and that might turn into a redirection. And so these are the kind of scenarios you're trying to play through your head. It might not happen, but you want to be aware of it in case it does, and you're not taken by surprise. Based on what you're seeing, what you predict, you want to then decide what your response is going to be, if any response at all. You might let it go. You might be like, I think it's going to be okay. You might decide to do something. When you do that thing, you got to execute that decision well, right? If there's any errors in this process, it's possible a conflict's going to occur because of a mistake, because you didn't notice something, because you executed poorly. All that stuff can make a conflict occur. This is not like something I don't want you in the yard going, now I have to notice, now I have to interpret, now I have to predict. This is something that it's going to happen so fast. And the most important thing is if you pay attention and you're noticing, the rest of the stuff will come, right? What it helps with more than anything is when an incident does happen, when you do have an issue where things don't go right, looking back, where did that breakdown happen? It's a really helpful tool for figuring out like where the breakdown happened, what you might have been able to do differently, what you missed, if anything. What you missed, if anything, yeah. And you're gonna miss stuff. Most of the time it's not gonna matter, but when it does, it's helpful to go back and notice. Somebody told me that people like mnemonics, so I just made up a few. If you wanna, you don't really have to remember this though. All right, so I'm just gonna do a quick basic playgroup overview, specifically for what we're doing this weekend. Basically, dog playgroup, 3 components, 2 or more dogs, 2 or more handlers preferred, human handlers, interacting in and with a physical environment. So that's the 3 sort of components. And so we're gonna go through these. Ideal playgroup. Anyone have any thoughts on what that looks like?
some nice give and take back and forth between the dogs.
Yeah.
Everybody's actually having a good time, not just being picked on or running and trying to hide.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Dogs are able to set boundaries and have those boundaries respected by others.
Yeah.
I think it's great when they're actually learning social skills. They're longer.
Yeah. Basically, what you all said is what I listed. Lack of conflict, obviously, so we're not having a bunch of arguments happening, even in the face of common triggers, which we'll go through the triggers next. Happy, relaxed dogs interacting appropriately. Low to moderate arousal levels. Everybody kind of aware what arousal levels look like and what that means. Mentally, physically safe. Minimal interventions needed from humans, playgroup handlers. So if you've got a group of dogs interacting nicely and appropriately, there's probably not a ton that the handler needs to be getting involved with. If the handlers are getting involved, it's to make up for deficits in either it could be the matches aren't quite right. It could be deficits in their skills. But it's usually if the humans are getting involved a lot, it's usually because of some sort of deficit. And then changes in the physical environment cause minimal change in behavior. So when things happen around them, they're not, if somebody's walking by with a dog, they're not getting into fight because of that. They're not, there could be, if you've got a really great 6 dogs, you might be able to have toys out. You might be able to have things like that and not have it affect their how they're interacting. What causes playgroup conflict? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Yeah.
For arousal.
Arousal, yeah.
Boundaries not being respected.
Yeah.
Being at threshold, like they're already high and the threshold's limiting.
Yeah. And I consider that sort of an arousal thing to me, basically, you know. So I didn't put this in here. It's going to be in your handout. I think there's 2 kinds of things that cause arousal. There's a general and a situational arousal. So general arousal is anything where, like, it's just within the group the arousal is happening. So dogs are playing rougher. It's just they've been out too long, whatever it might be. And then there's the situational arousal, which is more directed. They see a squirrel and they run over, or somebody walks by and they all start barking at the person. So it's just a good idea to recognize that again, it's the changes in the environment that might matter in causing their arousal to escalate and potentially getting into some sort of conflict. So over arousal, we talked about that. And I put these kind of things with under arousal because they're more, I guess, situational. Rough and fast play will be often cause dogs to escalate. Thresholds, gates, doors, dogs coming through, people coming through, that sort of gate area is often an issue. Crowding, pinning. Third wheel is like when you've got 2 dogs playing and you got that third dog coming in and policing, or just trying to play. Sometimes they don't want to play with that third dog. Redirections, dog walking by, both 2 dogs run to the fence and then redirects on the other dog. Mismatched personalities, play styles, pestering, including humping, guarding. Guarding's a big one, and that can include people, can include anything that the dog cares about, really. All right, so we're gonna go through these each one by one. All right, the dogs. Okay, we're gonna start thinking of the dogs in terms of their social skills, and I like to emphasize that it's a skill. Skill is the ability to use one's knowledge effectively and readily in execution or performance. Learned power of doing something competently, developed aptitude or ability. So learned and developed. That means it can improve, we can help teach it. Every dog is going to range on their social skill level. And so On one end, you're going to have your extremely socially skilled dogs. Those dogs are just, excellent at just, they can interact with tons of different dogs, different personalities, and generally succeed and be content and happy with those dogs. On the other hand, on the other side, we'll have the extreme socially challenged dogs. You could also say it's socially unskilled, and I'll probably use those terms interchangeably. And that's generally any dog that we don't have a record of any successful interactions at all, maybe a history of poor interactions, that kind of thing. The important thing to recognize is the less socially skilled your dogs are, the qualities of the handlers and the physical environment are going to be more important. So if you have a group of dogs with some socially unskilled dogs, your handlers need to be more trained. They need to be more skilled at managing it because they're going to be intervening more. So they need to be better. Your physical environment also matters more. Really making sure that you don't have toys or other things they can guard and things like that. Whereas if you've got 8 or 9 dogs who are like in love with each other and they're totally cool, you might be able to have toys out there. Your handlers might not have to do it. They could sit there on their phone and probably not be trained very well. For the people in daycares, it's in a sense, you have to make that decision, I think, whether you're going to have super easy dogs all the time and then just not worry so much about training your handlers. You still should train your handlers, but you can get away with it a little bit more. Or if you want to have some of those challenging dogs and have them and make sure that your employees and your staff is well trained and understands how to manage these groups. For the purpose of this workshop, we're going to have target dogs and helper dogs. The target dogs are going to be the dogs that we're working with. They're the ones that are going to have your social deficits and that we're targeting them to improve. Helper dogs are going to be generally more socially skilled dogs that we predict are going to help overcome the target dog's social deficits, basically. So target dogs, helper dogs. So when we're talking about skills, they start basically at the greeting ritual. Everybody knows what dogs look like when they meet nicely. Usually it's some sort of face sniff, butt sniff combo. Sometimes they'll disengage from there. Sometimes they'll start to play. It's very common when you're working with the socially challenged dogs, that initial greeting is where the breakdown happens, whether it's dog just immediately comes at another dog or during the sniffing process, somebody kind of objects, I suppose. Your socially skilled dogs are going to be better at navigating through those breakdowns. So if you've got a dog that is not so good at meeting, a socially skilled dog will sometimes help that dog knows how to respond in a way that dog doesn't escalate, basically. Obviously, if a dog just immediately goes and jumps another dog, that dog's going to want to defend himself. That's a little different, but yeah. In some cases, when you might not have the perfect dog or you can't even get to the point of a sniff, the handlers are going to have to intervene and assist a lot more. Here's just this is just a video of typical, typical good greeting, I'd say. This is a shelter in city shelter of Oklahoma City. And so these dogs I don't have any information on generally. And you could say it's, pretty normal. I mean, you could say maybe that they're a little stiff, but nothing I'm worried about. And you can see they're kind of just feeling each other out here, and it's like they're not quite engaged in full play yet, right? It's like, how is this? Are you okay with this? Yeah, so that's what we'd like it to look like, in theory. Characteristics of socially skilled dogs. Anybody have any thoughts on that? What that looks like? If not, that's okay.
De-escalate.
Yeah, that's a big one. Tolerant, yeah. Definitely tolerant. Yeah, so I just wrote down a bunch of stuff that I thought usually represented a socially skilled dog. They should enjoy interacting with a wide range of dogs. So more than tolerant, they should actually enjoy it. They generally display appropriate, non-triggering social behavior, including typical greeting ritual behavior. So they generally display appropriate behavior. That can mean appropriate corrections, things like that, but generally it's what you'd call appropriate. You can understand their response. Unaffected by common conflict triggers. We talked about those conflict triggers. They generally aren't too affected by that stuff. They receive and respect other dogs' signals, communication, resilient to conflict and inappropriate behavior, and that's really important. If these dogs have a negative interaction, they're not holding on to that for days, or they should bounce back pretty quickly from that. If they're not resilient, they're probably not dogs that you're gonna want to be experimenting with too much. They tend to try to diffuse conflict rather than escalate it. Again, if they're jumped by a dog or something, then they fight back, that's different. But if a dog corrects them or comes on strong, they generally don't go right into, I'm gonna fight back mode. Modulates the arousal level well. So even if they're playing with a dog who gets highly aroused while playing, they generally can keep it down. So they're not matching and then they're both escalating. Doesn't need a ton of assistance or specific physical environments to succeed. So again, we're not having to jump in constantly and they're often going to be their best helper dogs, but not always. And I want to emphasize that because there's a lot of times I'm using dogs that aren't particularly socially skilled in certain ways because they've got the attributes that I need for a certain other dog. And we'll go through some of that a little more. Socially challenged dogs are dogs that are their social skills are deficient in a way or certain ways or multiple ways. Often it'll result in physical conflict or fearful defensive behavior. Usually it's going to happen during a greeting ritual, initial introductions, or to an overreaction to some of those common triggers we talked about. Those are usually the times that I can identify where these things happen, is that greeting ritual doesn't go right, or they get over aroused, or somebody guards a water bucket or something like that, and it's basically an overreaction. Most likely, these skills are improvable with the right practice and experience. And I emphasize the right practice because sometimes people think you just throw them in, they're gonna get better, and you just throw them in. And sometimes it doesn't work that way. If they're just practicing their crappy behavior, it's not gonna get better. So you want them to get the right experience. And what does that mean? Repeated interactions with more socially skilled, usually helper dogs. And then expanding social circle and context at the dog's own pace. When I first wrote this, I put at a slow pace, but then I was like, there's certain dogs that they get it really quickly. So going slow doesn't really make sense. Sometimes I don't have the luxury of going slow. If you're like, man, this dog's doing really well, better than I expected, I'm gonna move quickly, try to go up to next steps. And I'm always looking for next steps. There's, we start with this dog, we start with this very controlled environment, and then we start to do things a little bit more. We're experimenting with different types of dogs that might present challenges and things like that, and then see what the dog can tolerate, and we just try to keep increasing their skill level. And it's surprising. It can happen in a matter of hours that you can really get past so much stuff. So your helper dogs, in most cases, I like to use dogs that are over a year old. I'll sometimes go a little younger than that, but generally you want to keep them over a year old because skills are developing. We really want to try to prevent while their skills are developing, having too many experiences that are negative for them. I also think generally their skills are more refined at that point, a little more just stable. They don't necessarily need the perfect social skills, so they don't need to be perfect. They just need to have the right attributes for whatever your target dog is. They tend to not correct, initiate, reciprocate conflict. So this is where things get a little, when we talk about socially skilled dogs, they often give what we call good corrections for inappropriate behavior. Problem is, if I've got a dog that's socially unskilled, that I'm worried is going to get into a fight, the last thing I want is my helper dog to initiate some sort of what that other dog would perceive as conflict and not take that correction well. So sometimes when I'm using a helper dog, I really don't want them correcting. I expect that target dog to be inappropriate, right? If I expect that dog to be inappropriate, then if I get that correction, that might, so that dog corrects, now my target dog reciprocates, now you've got a fight. Who's getting blamed? Oh, that dog can't be out with other dogs. He's with my best, most socially skilled dog, and he can't handle it. The problem is, he might be socially skilled, but that's not what that dog needed. He needed somebody that wasn't gonna, it was gonna be like, and we'll see some video and stuff for what I mean by that. Dog that can handle that sort of, yeah. It's hard sometimes to find those dogs, but that's ideal when you can have that. Like I mentioned, resilient to conflict, inappropriate behavior. Your helper dogs really need to be resilient. Modulates arousal level, we talked about that. The best helpers are going to tell you so much about how to proceed, especially once you get to know them. And like the dogs we're using this weekend, I don't know them at all. I met one of them yesterday, but I really don't know them at all. I had my dog Sonny for 12 years. He was my helper, and I retired him at 7, but he kept coming out of retirement because he was so good at helping me with these dogs. Because I could tell if a dog was being reactive. All I had to do was look at him to tell, because I know some people, I don't know, some people say they can tell when the dog's reactive, whether it's, they mean anything by it or not. I can't always tell. Sometimes I can get an idea, but I can't always tell. Sonny could tell. If they were serious, he avoided it. And when they weren't, he'd be like, I'll wait this out and then come back, and he was really good. So yeah, it's nice when you have dogs that you know. Protect your helpers. And this is important, especially if you're in daycares where you're using the same dogs a lot, even in shelters to some extent. You have dogs so first, you want to protect them in the short term and the long term. So in the short term, you want to make sure that if you've got this dog that you know is great with helping you with these tricky dogs, you want to make sure they're still getting plenty of time with dogs that are appropriate. It's very difficult for them. It's just like us, right? When you ever deal with somebody who's just completely exhausting with their social skills, and you just feel, after talking to them for 20 minutes, you want to make sure they're getting those opportunities to play with normal dogs. And in the long term, you might want to give them some extended breaks from doing that stuff. You notice sometimes that they'll start to just lose a little bit of interest in the whole thing. There's not really, yeah. If you've gotten to that point, you've generally gotten to know that dog pretty well. And so you're kind of like, yes, I'm going to give you a break. You just get that vibe from them. And maybe you know, so it's important to try to, when I'm in the shelter and I've got this perfect helper dog, for one thing, I don't know when that dog's going to get adopted. So I'm trying to keep looking for more. I'm always looking for more helpers that I can use reliably, but also so I can give them breaks when needed. There is, in the daycare especially, risk of over-socialization for your good dogs, for everybody, right? So you might have clients that bring their dogs 5 days a week from they were 5 months old, and then about a year in, they start to get grumpier. It's very possible that at that point they've been, I'd call it over-socialized. It's just too much. They don't need that much socialization. Some dogs can handle it. Some dogs go 5 days a week. They do fine, but plenty of dogs. I've seen so many dogs go from great to like grumpy as hell in a year. And so part of that is having honest conversations with owners. When I was working in daycares, I mean, I think even Hallenwolf, when we were there, we always said 2 or 3 days a week max usually is the best thing. I don't know, sometimes people don't listen or they have their own reasons, but usually I think, yeah, it's a risk. And you want to kind of watch for decrease in skills or grumpiness is the best way to look at it. All right, so does anybody have any questions? Yeah. That means I've covered everything perfectly clearly. Yeah.
You might go over it. You have I guess like a young or an off, and you have one for their whole.
No, because you might have a dog. You might have a dog 5-6 months that's already having problems. I do. If I've got, I'll talk about this a little bit when we talk about risk assessment, but if I've got like a 13-year-old dog, and I'm just like, is it really worth the risk and worth, so we'll talk about that a little bit in the risk assessment part, but there's no real limit. So this is just like a really crude, broad personality measure that I find really helpful for me in making matches. And it's really to think of these dogs on a scale of introversion and extroversion, where a highly extroverted dog is going to want to take space from another dog, and a highly introverted dog is going to want to get space from another dog. So they're going to want to avoid, want space, basically. You will find dogs on the extremes, extremely fearful, extremely forward. A lot of times it's going to be in those middle ranges. It is a scale, and a lot of your best socially skilled ones are really going to be closer to that middle, where they can handle more introverted, they can match with extroverted as well, they can match a little bit. It's important to understand that their level of introversion and extroversion can change in relation to the company they're in. Just like people, I can come up here and talk to you guys, get me at some party with the same amount of people, and I'm like, super shy and introverted for whatever reason. That's the context. These are the contexts that I'm comfortable in. You get a dog that's generally extroverted, put them out with an extremely extroverted, that dog might suddenly become more introverted. Or you put them out with a big group, they might become more introverted. So just be aware that can change. It's very crude, but just as a mental exercise for if I've got this dog that I think is going to be on this here on the scale, it helps me pick what helper dogs to use based on that. We'll talk more about that. All right, done with the dogs. Human handlers. What makes a good playgroup handler? I sat there for ages, like what actually makes a good playgroup handler? I think it's a combination of having a certain set of skills and good judgment. You could say that judgment is a skill, but upon further going down this rabbit hole, I think it's different than a skill. They do have in common, though, that practice is really the best way to improve both. And it has to be active, proactive practice. I've seen daycares, worked with daycares where you got people watching play groups and they're just there, they're babysitting. They're not learning anything. They're there to react when things go wrong. They're not gonna improve their skills. So it is really about being proactive and I think really going through that nifty process that we were talking about, noticing and subsequent steps. Anybody have any thoughts on what helpful skills are for handlers? Attentiveness. Yeah.
Being calm.
Yeah.
What was that?
Being calm. Anything else?
Ability to make decisions quickly.
Yeah. Good judgment.
You have to be resilient too, because there's going to be fights no matter what.
That's a really good one that I don't think I put down. But yeah, I agree. Yeah. They have to be comfortable in various play groups. So comfortable with different types of play styles, different size dogs, just all sorts of variations of play groups and energy levels and all that stuff. Just being comfortable. Remains calm, controls emotions. Even if you're not really, even if inside you're like heart's pounding, you got to try to fake it. I find sometimes if I'm really nervous, chewing gum helps because it helps me breathe. Observant of the important stuff. I've been in playgroups with people where they'll notice the trees but not notice what's going on in front of them. That's not helpful. You got to notice the important stuff. They use their voice, body, and tools effectively to influence the dog behavior when necessary. We're not going to go too into how you use your voice, body, and tools. That is going to be one of the handouts you get tomorrow that kind of goes more into detail about that stuff. We'll briefly go over some tools later. A basic understanding of dog body language and especially play signals and things like that. Understand common conflict triggers. So you got to know the things that often that tend to cause fights, that tend to cause conflict. If you're around it enough, you start to notice these patterns of what tends to cause these things if you're paying attention. It's important to be able to communicate, describe behavior, minimizing labeling. That's super important, especially if you're working with a lot of people and you're trying to transmit information to them. You want to try to avoid labeling. We'll go a little bit more into that. And they're actively engaged in that continuous process that I mentioned, that they're noticing, interpreting, predicting, making decisions, executing. And yeah, so that should be going through their heads every second, basically. All right, can good judgment be learned? So I went into a nice rabbit hole on this because I was like, I don't know, can it be taught? Can it be learned? And the jury's out, it seems. But there were certain things that it seemed to be agreed upon in scientific literature. So what's good judgment, first of all? It's the ability to make sound decisions or come to sensible conclusions. And basically everywhere it said the only way to do it is through experience and through making mistakes. So experience. And it never stops. When I left here 5 years ago, I thought I was pretty good at dog stuff. In the meantime, I've done so much more in the last 5 years. I think back to some of the stuff I did. I'm like, that was so dumb. And there's several times I'm like, I was really dumb. That was a stupid match. That was like, why was I thinking? Like, I can't even believe I thought that at the time. And, that never stops. And hopefully in 5 years, I'm like, the same now. Hopefully I come back in 5 years and I'm like, I can't believe I did that. That was so dumb of me. Detaching ego from the process. And that's more than just like, oh, I'm so good at this, I can match all dogs. It's that, but it's also detaching emotional context to it, right? Like, so it's very easy to want, oh my God, I really want this dog to be good with other dogs. Or I've got this client that, and you feel that pressure. For me, even here, like, I'm gonna be like, oh man, I don't want to embarrass myself, or I want to impress you guys or whatever. And I have to try to detach all that from my decision making, and it's not easy. Like, if I'm working with a client or whatever, it's always a thing I have to guard against. Am I thinking this because I based on logic, or is it because I want it so bad, or because of a different thing? And I'm not even sure sometimes if I made that decision because I just don't know. But the important thing is to recognize that where self-awareness is important, just being aware. Like, I'm thinking, what should I do next? What's informing that decision? Is it based on logic? Try to do your best to make informed, logical decisions. What prevents us from trying certain dogs in play groups? So I'll often go to like a shelter or a daycare, and they've got 5 or 6 dogs that they're solo dogs or just not getting out with other dogs. And there's usually a bunch of different reasons I get for it. Anybody have any thoughts on like why don't try socializing certain dogs? Anybody?
Previous interactions.
Previous interactions.
A
Yeah.
lot of people base it just on kennel behavior though.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Why they come in with notes like
First three, that first line there, that everything you just mentioned, current behavior. So people just see they're being leash reactive, they're being crazy in their kennel. So that makes them like not want, makes them nervous. Historical events, we tried before, it didn't work. Or they just haven't had success doing it. Reports, dog came in, he gets returned to the shelter. Oh, he hates other dogs, and it gets written down. Owner says hates other dogs. Well, great, that's helpful. And so then people will not do it, you know. So those are three major ones. Sometimes I get, but he doesn't want to be around other dogs. Like they interpret that from the body language at the fence or something. And to me, that's a cop-out. Dogs aren't like known for their skills in self-analysis and introspection and what they need. Sure, right now they might not want to be thrown into a group of dogs. That doesn't mean we can't help them become more comfortable in that situation. Our job is to say, okay, I understand you don't like this right now. Is there a way we can make this good for you so that we can make this a positive experience for you so we can improve this? So I don't buy that. I get that from trainers a lot. Overreading dog body language, putting too much significance into what the dog is telling you. Yes, right now, but the point is we're trying to improve it. Unwillingness to use the interrupter tools, and this is another one that with trainers, especially with sort of positive reinforcement trainers, which I am positive, in training, when I'm doing training, I'm positive reinforcement. Interrupter tools are basically aversives. If I could figure out a way to be as effective using only rewards and positive reinforcement in a playgroup, I would. But the problem is, what's a reward? It's what dogs want. What are dogs going to guard? Things they want. So if I bring food into that yard, try to use food as the reward or toys, I'm just introducing a trigger that's really common for causing fights. So I need a way to interrupt behavior fast, from a distance, as quickly as possible. So I got to use my interrupter tools. Believe me, I wish there was another way sometimes, but we use them really responsibly in a way that's not meant to scare them. It's really just to get their attention quickly. I really take great care in trying not to scare dogs in a playgroup.
Unless they're in a full-fledged fight, then I don't give a shit. I'm gonna just break it up however I have to break it up. But breed biases,
really common. I have it, and I have to guard against that. And coming from a heavily shelter background, it's a lot of pit mixes. So a lot of the times when things go wrong, it happens to be a pit mix. So if I've got two equivalent dogs, like a golden retriever at 70 pounds and pit mix at 70 pounds, I'm probably a little bit more nervous about the pit mix. I don't know if it's a valid or if it's just because of the numbers, but I know I have it, so I have to guard against it. And again, this comes down to that self-awareness thing, is know your biases and what makes you nervous. And if certain things make you really nervous, you might not want to do that particular thing, or you might want to get help or take extra measures. Risk aversion, not having alternate methods to our normal introduction method. So this is really common. This is how we introduce dogs. Doesn't go well. Dog's not good with other dogs. You need to have different methods that you can try when things don't go right in a certain way, and different alternatives, because there is no one way to do it. A lack of perfect helper dogs. So sometimes you've got this dog then you just don't have the right dog for this dog that's not getting out, and you're waiting to get this perfect dog. I understand that. If you don't have the perfect dog, sometimes you just have to take the whole process a little slower, and you might have to just vary how you're doing that introduction, take it a little slower and account for that. Not enough time, resources. I totally get that. You've got 100 dogs you're trying to get out, and you're going to spend how long on just one dog? Even there's situations where I had this dog that I knew was going to be in the shelter for months probably. Even if I could try for 20 minutes every week and just eventually get there, it's better than nothing. And then just our own fears in general, just being afraid for whatever reason. And I think we all have our fears. A lot of this stuff stems from fear. Probably all those things I listed stem from some sort of fear. I think it helps to really identify what you're actually afraid of, right? Most dog fights, when there is an injury, it's usually not that bad. Usually it's not, I'm worried that this dog's gonna get really seriously injured. Normally I'm not too worried about that. But when I'm working at a shelter, at the Oklahoma City shelter, I had a full vet staff there. I didn't have owners to report to. I had the trust of my bosses to do this stuff that I had to consider, and I had the dog's outcome to consider, right? If I didn't want dogs to injure another dog, because they euthanize dogs I'd come in every day and there's dogs gone that I just put out yesterday. And so I didn't want to get those dogs into trouble. And they didn't want me using muzzles. So I had to really work around that. But so my risk is different than daycare, where if there's a little puncture, oh crap, I gotta tell the owner. Really understanding your risk and figuring out how you can minimize it. And we'll go through risk assessment a little later. You have to be okay to taking risks though. Just try to make them smart risks, but taking risks is just part of the deal. This goes to what Ashley said before. After a difficult incident, how do we recover? You have to be resilient. It's hard, I think. Sometimes you have a big brawl or something, and it's emotional breaking it up. Your adrenaline's going. I think for me, I just still find it so rewarding that I just get motivated to keep going and do it anyway. And again, normally the injuries aren't that bad in the end, knock on wood. So yeah, you have to be resilient in that way. Describing dog behavior. Yes.
You had mentioned interrupter tools on the
Yeah.
previous slide. Are we going to get further into that?
Yeah.
What good interrupter?
Yeah, we're gonna go into that, and you're gonna get a handout as well with a little bit more of that'll have more of the pros and cons to them, because they do have their cons, and yeah. But we'll go through them as well today, just briefly. Yeah, so describing dog behavior, and this is really important, just to be able to communicate. If you're working on a team, especially, but even if you're not in a shelter, how you communicate the dog's behavior, it might really matter for that dog. Remember that most people aren't professionals, and they're reading things as, if dog was aggressive towards another dog, what the hell does that mean? But you know that the adopter is going to picture something and what it means, and it's probably not what you intended. So I recommend you get is aggressive out of your vocabulary. You'll never see me say a dog is aggressive, ever. Because it's really not sensible. It is, it's terrible. And then other sensationalistic words, attacked, hates, things like that. Try to avoid those. I worked with Erica and Lynette for a long time. They know, you have your shorthand. They know that if I say, this dog's being a jackass or something, that they know what I mean by that. You still have to be careful with it, but you're going to develop shorthand. But I think when you've got more turnover, things like that, you really want to be very deliberate about your language. And so what I always say is, if there's an incident, imagine you want somebody to direct the scene of that in a movie of what happened. And so getting it who, what, when, where, maybe why if it's really obvious. So I only do why if it's super obvious. Yeah, I can't even think of an example right off the top of my head, but usually because I want it to be objective, so I'm trying not to put interpretations into that necessarily. If you're communicating with other people, you might want to say what your theories are about it, maybe, but generally who, what, when, where is what you're going for. A little example, when I let Billy in yard, he approached Betty quickly and immediately pounced on his back growling. Betty corrected him, a scuffle ensued. I sprayed hose in their direction and they separated. Kind of just gives a sort of description of what happened without my opinion of the dog's, or judgment on the dog's personality or anything like that. Questions about the human handlers? Whoa. All right, physical environment. Ideal environment for introducing socially challenged dogs. Any thoughts on what that looks like?
I mean, it's far away from other stimuli.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Really hard in the shelter.
Yep.
Neutral territory.
Yeah. As neutral as possible, because most of those dogs are, yeah. But that'll come into play a little bit with the order of things, of how you put out dogs and stuff. Anybody else? Really obvious. What do we need? Fenced, secure area.
Catch pen.
Yeah, preferably, highly preferred. I prefer to have 2 yards next to each other, but obviously most time we're not going to have ideal environments to work in. But if I was to build one, that's what I'd be looking for. Yeah, so fenced yard, preferably 2 enclosed yards divided by a fence with a connecting gate. Catch pen is fine. That's what we'll be doing mostly today, I think. Toys removed. Get rid of toys. Make sure anything that they might guard is picked up. Preferably not a lot of enclosed space where they can crowd each other. Big enough, but not too big. That's really vague, but generally, I like it to be big enough for them to run around and stretch their legs, but I also like to be able to get to them quickly if I need to. So, like, this to me is bigger than I would generally like, but it's fine. I mean, I like to either use a large tub for drinking water or multiple drinking areas. So 3 or 4 buckets in one area, 3 or 4 more buckets in another area, because a lot of times one will go drink water and that'll get the other one to go drink water, and now they're sharing from the same bucket, which if you've got a dog, it's fairly rare that you get water guarding, but it does happen. I mean, frequently enough that it's something I try to prevent. So if you have multiple buckets, hopefully they'll go to separate buckets when you do that. Relatively quiet area away from stimuli, especially barking dogs or dogs being walked past. It's really helpful.